Here's your word for the day from Calvary in Lake Havasu. Visit us on the web at calvaryaz.com.
Well, hey there, thanks for tuning in to your word for the day from Calvary. My name is Robert. It's good to be with you here today. Got a question as we get started. Have you ever argued with someone only to find out that they were right and you were wrong? It's a terrible feeling, isn't it? I hate that, but it happens, and somehow it's more aggravating when it's your spouse that it happens with. I think because you see them and you're reminded of how you lost. There's a mental scoreboard we have. We shouldn't do that, but that's a whole other episode topic that is not what we're discussing today. But I think we can all be glad that when those situations happen, that it's not recorded for billions of people to read. Aren't you glad that's the case? I am. But in Scripture, we see this happen with the disciples, that their actions, both good and bad, are recorded for thousands of years for billions of people to read and analyze and process. We're going to do that today. In Mark chapter 31, Peter finds himself as sometimes the common, but in this case, the object of this situation. In Mark chapter 8, verse 31 through 33, it says this. It says, "And he," that is Jesus, "began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and chief priests and scribes and be killed, and after 3 days rise again." Very clearly, plainly tells them this is what's going to happen. Verse 32, he says this plainly, "And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But turning and seeing his disciples, Jesus rebuked Peter and said, 'Get behind me, Satan, for you are not setting your mind on the things of God, but on the things of man.'" I find this so interesting. First, just the reality that they were so surprised by the crucifixion of Jesus, and yet multiple times he plainly tells them what would happen. But also the decision by Peter to rebuke the Son of God. You're wrong. And aside from just the abrasiveness and how we read into that, in the moment you have to understand that he had a valid point. There was validity to his perspective, and that Jesus is saying, hey, the chief priests, the scribes, the Pharisees, they're going to do this. And Peter's going, but you're better than the chief priests and the scribes and the Pharisees. You're the Messiah. You're the Son of God. Why would you have to surrender to them? Why would you have to suffer under them or under the Romans? That's not logical. You shouldn't be put under their submission. And Jesus, though, understands the bigger picture. He understands that actually was necessary so that we could be saved, so that we could be forgiven. The cross was a requirement for him. And we can now be so glad that Peter was wrong, so glad that his perspective wasn't the correct one. But I wonder for us today if we find ourselves in the same place of Peter, thinking that our view, our perspective of how we navigate life, of how we apply truth is better than God's perspective. We think that we have a better plan for our family, for our health, for our career, our sexuality, our money, our priorities, our hobbies. And we're saying, God, I know better than you. Let's be careful that we don't think that our view, our perspective on life is better than God's. Because otherwise, we're going to be in a place where God has to directly rebuke us, just like he did to Peter in this passage. Instead, let's be people who surrender and say, God, not my will, but your will. I want to follow you. I want to surrender to you. I want to follow your lordship and your leadership in my life. And if we do that, we're going to find an incredible life of faithfulness and fruit in our faith. And we're going to find that God's plans are always better than our own. So I encourage you to surrender and don't try and rebuke God like Peter did in this passage. Have a great day. We'll see you next time.